Joining us today, Bre Payton, who's a writer at the Federalist, and Democratic strategist Franco Ripple. Thank you both for joining us on Newsmax. Always a pleasure to have you. Bre, is this Kasich's way of establishing himself as a so-called moderate Republican alternative to candidates like Ted Cruz, and will that help him in primaries like New York?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. John Kasich is positioning himself as someone who is more moderate and someone who's not going to take a harder line on an issue like gay rights and bathroom bills. And so I think that he is really distinguishing himself in that way. And I think it could potentially help him in a state like North Carolina. But I think what's interesting is that overall he has lost by and large every single state except for Ohio. And I think that's because he has been distinguishing himself as a moderate candidate like this. I think that this election cycle and this time around, a moderate candidate is not what Republican voters want. And so I think that while Kasich might do a little bit better in New York, he's definitely not slated to win. So ultimately, he's really putting himself in a position to be hurt by positioning himself this way as a more moderate candidate on this issue.
Franco, should Democrats be worried?
Well, no, far from Democrats being worried. This is an issue that plays electorally right into Democrats' hands. Democrats have been the party for decades now that have always stood up for the LGBT community and have put anti-equality activists on notice that this kind of this aggression will not stand, man, to quote the famous movie.
For decades, Franco, for decades?
From the presidential race and ask ourselves, 16 years into this century, why are we still having these debates over equality and who can use a bathroom and who can't? And Republicans who've traditionally been all too free to sell out to big business are now seeing that sort of closed-mindedness come home to roost when you have, John, as you said, companies like PayPal and Deutsche Bank and rockers like The Boss who are pulling out of states like North Carolina saying these are not the values that we stand for.
For decades, though, Franco, let's be fair, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, not quite for decades, although I'm sure some Democrats came around on the issue a lot sooner than they have. But this is kind of the issue that Republicans always find themselves in, right, Bre? I don't remember hearing reports of people complaining en masse because they felt like their privacy was violated because a transgender person was coming in the bathroom. I see it's almost as if Republicans, as in the case of North Carolina, try to get too cute with these laws sometimes, and it just blows up in their faces.
I would disagree. I think that a lot of women feel that their safety or that their comfort could potentially be violated if
correct me if I'm wrong, Bre, but are there examples of women complaining about this to police in North Carolina?
Well, I, for one, don't like it as a woman. I wouldn't feel comfortable if a man who was claiming to be transgender and who wasn't really, was just kind of using that guise and coming in there and using a bathroom with me. I wouldn't really appreciate that. So I think there definitely are a lot of women who feel the same way that I do. And I think it's important to note that a lot of those companies and a lot of those artists who have pulled out and who are boycotting North Carolina right now like PayPal has done business and is doing business in 25 other countries in which it's illegal to be openly gay, including 5 countries like Saudi Arabia and Yemen, where the penalty of being openly gay is death. So I think in this case, it's not really an issue of whether or not these companies are on the right side of history. I think it really shows that these companies don't really care about gay rights all that much, because if they really did, then they would be consistent and they would be boycotting business in all 25 of those other countries as well. I think this is an issue of political expediency, and I think we need to call it like it is, and we need to say that that's what they're doing.
Bre, with all due respect, if we as Americans try to set ourselves up as the standard for the world, the beacon on a hill that the rest of the world should look to, should we be really looking down to those other nations who, yes, jail and beat and murder LGBT citizens of their own, or should we be trying to do the right thing? Yes, perhaps companies like PayPal continue to transact business in countries that do the wrong thing, but should we play down to them and say, well, they do it there, so why should we do it for our own personal comfort?
But Franco, she's bringing up hypocrisy, though.
Right. Well, to speak to that point, I think it's important to point out that one of the artists who boycotted, who's refusing to play in North Carolina, Jimmy Buffett, his restaurants that he owns in Florida doesn't, and in the Keys, it doesn't. It uses the same bathroom codes that they have in North Carolina. Like, he has gendered restrooms in restaurants that he owns. So I think it is an issue of consistency, and it is an issue of political expediency. And to speak to that point of, whether or not we should be setting an example for this in America and doing the right thing, quote unquote. I think if that's what you want to do and that we should be setting an example in America, I think that the artists who are boycotting, doing business and performing in North Carolina should be consistent in their issues and consistent in their behavior in the states. And that's not what they're doing. The fact is that they're trying to be politically expedient. They're not being consistent, and they're being very hypocritical.
All right, single stall. Locked doors for all bathrooms from here on out.
There you go. There's your compromise right there.
Unisex, single-stall bathrooms with locked doors. I like it.
John's running for president.
I'd be cool with that.
Bre, Franco, stick around. We still have a lot more to talk about here on Newsmax Now, including harsh accusations of a rigged political system on both sides of the fence. Is it all just a big misunderstanding? We'll talk about that next.
We've got a corrupt system. It's not right.
The fix is in. That Washington is corrupted.
And for those who worry about a convention, it'll be right in the open.
You're assuming that every superdelegate who now supports Secretary Clinton will stay with her?
I have a really considerable lead in the popular vote, and I have a considerable lead in the delegates.
Political parties choose their nominee, not the general public.
You want people to at least say when they walk away, okay, they played it straight.
Both Republican and Democratic candidates are crying foul over their party's respective delegate selection process. Donald Trump is especially angry after Ted Cruz won almost all of Colorado's delegates over the weekend, prompting Trump to lash out, calling the process rigged. And Trump's not alone. Several Colorado voters are also angry. They feel like they didn't get a say in the nominating process. Colorado GOP leaders canceled the party's straw poll in August to avoid binding delegates to a candidate who may not survive until the convention this summer. Instead, the Republicans awarded delegates using a caucus system. Cruz's campaign worked behind the scenes to build a network of supporters, while Trump didn't get a paid staffer on the ground just until like last week. And as you can see, the move has paid off for Cruz so far.
All right, let's bring back in our roundtable. Joining us today again, we have Bre Payton. She's a writer at The Federalist, and Democratic strategist Franco Ripple joining us as well. All right, so there are accusations of the system being rigged on both sides. We'll let you guys defend your positions in a second. But I also want to talk about this issue in Wyoming, for example, Bre, because Bernie Sanders beat Hillary Clinton there by 10 percentage points, maybe even more, but they tied in delegates. So you would argue that the Democratic system is just as rigged as the Republican one. Do you agree? Loaded question.
That is a loaded question, right?
I wouldn't, I really wouldn't say that. I think the Republican system, I think that there are set rules to the Republican primary and that it varies a lot state by state. And that if a candidate who is competent and has a competent staff definitely would be able to work to use those rules to his advantage. And that's not something that we've been seeing from Donald Trump at all throughout this election cycle. In fact, we've just seen bungling incompetency after incompetency time after time again, and hiring inept and corrupt staffers to handle this whole delegate process. So I think that the issues going on here are just completely different. And I would almost, and turning to the Democratic side of this whole primary thing, I would almost commend the Democrats in being able to come up with a system that allows them to control and figure out how to prop up a candidate who they want. I think that's maybe something that the Republicans could learn from.
Backhanded compliment, if I ever heard one. Franco.
Bless your heart.
Talking about the superdelegates there. Go ahead, Franco.
Go ahead, Frank.
Well, I was about to say something nice and say I agree with Bre, but I'm going to rescind that right now. I think. No, first of all, on the Republican side of things, I do agree with Bre that it's almost as if the Trump campaign decided, Donald Trump decided apparently a long time ago now, as far back, the Politico reported today, as far back as the late 90s, Trump was thinking seriously about running for president, and it made its way to the highest echelons of the Clinton White House that was in fact the case. So for someone who's thought about this for a long time, and someone who prides himself on organizational structure and being a master business person, you would think that he would understand that a lot of this comes down to delegate selection, and the fact that he let his campaign be so disorganized that he now in the 11th hour of the primary had to demote his campaign manager in favor of someone with convention organizing experience, and he's woefully behind in terms of delegate organizing, says a lot about his actual candidacy. And as far as the Democratic side, I think all we have to say is Hillary Clinton is the only candidate in this race who has more votes than Donald Trump in primaries. She is ahead in the popular vote, and she's ahead in pledged delegates as well as superdelegates, who again are elected by people. So I see no problem with that.
Well,
I'm waiting for John. I'm looking at John. Come on, I know you're ready to say something.
The superdelegate thing. I mean, obviously, this is what both parties have devised systems to have a republic kind of be the shape and structure of their political parties, and this is the same way the Constitution is built. I think what really is at play here, people unfamiliar with the primary process, unfamiliar with the political process. There's a lot of new voters on both sides involved this time around. And if you ask most people on the street, which kind of governmental system do we live in, most people would say a democracy, but it's not a democracy. It's a republic. And that's what people don't like to be told, is that it's not the will of the voters always that has a say. There's a check and balance on that, and that is the elected officials or delegates in this case. Bre, what do you think?
I completely agree, and I think you're right that our country is a democratic republic being the key word there. And also I think that, as you said, the party representatives are chosen and selected by a group of people. They're not just like oligarchs who come out of nowhere, right? So I think understanding the primary process and understanding the political process is something that we need to make sure that voters are all aware of, so that way they don't become disillusioned or upset about the outcome of who their party eventually selects. And I think the process on the Democratic side has been commendable, just in that they've been able to control and operate the whole thing so well, and it's been running so smoothly. And I think on the Republican side, as messy as it has been, I think a contested convention is going to be a really good thing for the Republican Party, because it'll help them kind of air a lot of these grievances and figure out who really is the strongest candidate going forward.
That's the biggest compliment you could possibly give the Democrats, right, Franco?
They said the same thing about 2012, right? It was supposed to work out a lot of the kinks.
How lucky are we that we get this system instead of the alternative?
That's true. Right. That's true. We could live in a monarchy. Thanks so much for being with us, Franco and Bre. Great to see you guys again.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Hillary Clinton and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's off-color comment about CP time? Let us know. Tweet us your thoughts.